Thank you very much for that. Alan was too generous. It's a great honor to be introduced by Alan Jones. You know, Alan and I have something in common. When we go on the ABC, they put a health warning on us. Controversial conservative Alan Jones, controversial conservative Mark Steyn. You know, and frankly, there's a lot of people in Melbourne who think we shouldn't be here tonight. So I was very touched this morning passing the Melbourne Arts Centre to see that some ladies had climbed up the spire and hung a big banner saying, "Let them stay." Alan and I thank you. That was very moving. And if those ladies are here tonight, because I understand they came down from the tower about 40 minutes before we came in here, I'd like to thank you very much indeed. Lovely sentiment. Thank you. It's great to be back with John Roscombe and the rest of the gang at the IPA, and I thank them very much. The IPA, as we've heard, are in the freedom business, and we need more people in the freedom business in Australia and the rest of the West. I was last here 4 prime ministers ago. So that's about 6 months. It was before Malcolm knifed Tony, and back when either Julia was knifing Kevin or Kevin was knifing Julia. I forget which it was. And it's a sobering thought that until Kevin Rudd, if I'd said I was last here 4 prime ministers ago, we'd have been back to Sir Robert Menzies. It's John Howard, Bob Hawke, Malcolm Fraser. Yeah, I intentionally left out Paul Keating. And so should you. Guff Whitlam, and I think I left out the fellow who left his clothes on the beach, Harold Holt. But we're in the ballpark, and I'd like Kevin and Julia to leave their clothes on the beach, and just swim out to sea, punching each other in the kisser and spilling each other as the waves wash over them on the far horizon. Last time I spoke in Melbourne at the IPA, I spoke actually I was on stage, I shared the stage with Tony Abbott, and he was the coming man back then, and you know, so I put him in the old Rolodex, useful chap to know, and in between my 2 Melbourne appearances, the coming man came and went. Somebody, Bob Day said that I'd compared Australia to the Soviet Union, which I don't think I actually did. But there's a line in the Fred Astaire movie Silk Stockings, in which one Soviet commissar is discussing with another Soviet commissar what's happened to a third Soviet commissar, and he says, "I'll look him up in Who's Still Who." And that's Australian politics. I'll look him up in Who's Still Who. I also should thank Bob Day for his commitment to rid the world of Section 18C, which again is what I was speaking about. You know, before one speaks to an audience such as yourselves, a prudent man goes to the library and looks up 10 can't-miss tips for public speakers. And right up at the front, they advise you to open up with a light-hearted observation so people know it's not going to be a lot of heavy stuff. And that's what Professor Sir Tim Hunt, Fellow of the Royal Society, did last year. He's a Nobel laureate. He's a genuine one, not a pretend one, like the guy who's suing me, the hockey stick inventor whose name escapes me. Because frankly, with my legal bills, I have a right to forget his name, I think. And last year, Sir Tim was in Seoul, South Korea, for some science conference, and he was required to make a few remarks. So he began with an ill-advised attempt at warming up the room. Quote, "Let me tell you about my trouble with girls. 3 things happen when they are in the lab. You fall in love with them, they fall in love with you, and when you criticize them, they cry. Not the funniest joke in the world. That's why you should hire a professional and not try it yourself. But the genius of a scientist is often inversely proportional to his social ease. So Sir Tim did not anticipate that a throwaway line about how girls are so emotional about these things would result in the girls getting so emotional about these things. While he was on the flight back to London, his life was destroyed. Over. He lost everything. His professorship, his Royal Society committeeships, all of it gone because of 12 seconds in a glorious half-century of scientific brilliance. There's a section in one of my books called Last Laughs, in which I write about a novel called The Joke, Milan Kundera's great tale of the pitfalls of ideologically unsound gags in communist Eastern Europe, in which a man makes a very mild throwaway joke and his entire life is ruined. And that's how we in the free world used to think about the communist world. They were the guys who policed jokes. At the time of Stalin's death in 1953, there were over 200,000 prisoners in Soviet labor camps who'd been convicted of telling jokes of which the regime did not approve. And we laugh because we're free and they're not. But in fact, the world of Milan Kundera, in which a guy's life is destroyed for the wrong joke, is alive and well in the supposed free West. We don't send you to labor camp for the joke, not yet, but we are willing to destroy your life completely for a non-ideologically compliant gag, as has happened to Sir Tim Hunt and others. There's something ugly and tyrannous in the air, and I don't use that term lightly. 50 years ago, everyone was hopping mad because in the American South they had separate drinking fountains and bus seats for blacks and whites. Now we've got rid of all that bad segregation, and we have good segregation. At the Queensland University of Technology, we have separate computer labs for Aboriginals because apparently they have a separate Windows operating program that non-Aboriginals couldn't possibly figure out. I don't know what that is. But we have at British municipal swimming baths, we have sex-segregated swimming sessions for Muslims. And the British Labour Party hosts events where the men and women sit in separate sections. And if you make an offhand gag about any of this, you will be investigated, as these Queensland students are currently being, following a complaint made under Section 18C, the law that Bob Day spoke about. Tyranny is always capricious, and you can fall afoul of it no matter how hard you try to keep up. At Wellesley College in Massachusetts, a girl student who identifies as a, quote, masculine of centre genderqueer, unquote, named Timothy. By the way, are there any masculine of centre genderqueers here tonight? Yes, you, madam, at the back with the full beard. A masculine of centre genderqueer named Timothy, who prefers to be referred to by male pronouns, and she was told she could no longer run for coordinator of the School Office of Multicultural Affairs because she was now a white male and therefore insufficiently diverse to be a diversity officer. Which is tough on a masculine of centre genderqueer. She diversified a wee bit too far and diversified herself right out of the diversity business and round the back into the dead white male business. So she was over. You can laugh, but no one who matters in our society is laughing. There are no jokes in Islam, Ayatollah Khomeini sternly warned, But as Sir Tim Hunt and those Queensland students and many others have discovered, there are fewer jokes outside Islam too. My driver while I was in Cloncurry was a chap called David, and he was talking about how touchy people are today. They're on a hair trigger, ready to find a fence wherever they can. And he mentioned a famous All-Bran advertisement that most of you have seen over the years, in which they're in the office and some guy's sitting in his cubicle and says, "All-Bran is delicious," and immediately a very tall lady pops up above the cubicle partition and says, "I heard that, you said tall Jan is malicious." I prefer Sir Tim Hunt's comedy stylings myself. It's not the greatest line, and unlike Sir Tim, All-Bran paid the most expensive geniuses in the advertising world $1 gazillion to come up with that. But it skewers the touchiness of the world we live in today, where people have been incentivized to take offense and then given the state the power to adjudicate that offence, which is really what 18C and Andrew Bolt's case was all about. So it was inevitable that an ad about how touchy people take offence over nothing caused some touchy people to take offence over nothing and to complain to Australia's Advertising Standards Bureau, quote, "There exists a widespread general prejudice towards tall young women, which irrationally has something to do with the notion that males must be taller than their female partners. This ad would be particularly hurtful to many young and older tall women who have frequently experienced slights relating to their height. The ad is thereby singling out and lampooning in a cruel way a vulnerable group of people." Are there any tall women here tonight? So naturally, Kellogg's was tied up for months trying to explain that the purpose of the ad was to promote the idea that all bran is delicious and not that tall women are malicious. Because they're in the business of selling breakfast cereal, not short women, you know. As far as I know, I mean, I don't know whether they've, got some speciality service going on the side, if you're looking for a woman under 4'11" or something. And so a bunch of bureaucrats solemnly investigated all this heightism for a few months and racked up enough overtime to remodel their vacation homes. And best of all, Australia pioneered a whole new victim group, which is great, because the trick is to find exciting new victim groups for the same old fast-shrinking oppressor group of white men to discriminate against. A joke is the smallest indicator and most reliable indicator of liberty. So laugh it up while you can, because there will be no jokes in the future, none. It will be a wasteland of plonking earnestness. During the final stages of Nelson Mandela's slowly deteriorating health, Neil Phillips, who runs the Crumbs sandwich shop in the English town of Rugeley, went online and tweeted, "My PC takes so long to shut down, I've decided to call it Nelson Mandela." The Staffordshire Constabulary arrested him, seized his computers, and in the course of an 8-hour detention, fingerprinted and DNA swabbed him. 8 hours in a jail cell for a joke. Not in communist Czechoslovakia, but in England. The Staffordshire Constabulary's joke investigation took so long to shut down, I decided to call it Nelson Mandela. You can laugh, but no one who matters is laughing. We now live in an age of state ideology. There's a correct position on certain subjects, and it's an ever-growing list. Same-sex marriage, climate change, transgender rights, Muslim immigration. Millions and millions of people across the Western world now think it perfectly normal that free speech does not extend to these areas, that on these subjects there's only the approved party line, and dissenting views not only can't be heard in public, but should not even be expressed in private. And if you're found to have expressed them, it's entirely reasonable that you should lose your job and, if necessary, your liberty. Bernie Sanders, who may be the next president of the United States, if the... As Tony Jones assured me, this is one of those scientifically balanced audiences. Now, I don't like apostasy laws, whether it's for Sharia or for climate Sharia, which are actually remarkably similar religions. Barack Obama promises to lower the oceans. ISIS promises a global caliphate. So far, they're doing a better job than he is. The Guardian says Australia will be entirely uninhabitable within a few years. They said this a few years ago, so you may leave the Park Hyatt and find it's all been washed away while we're having dinner. The Guardian says Australia will be entirely uninhabitable. Islam for UK says Britain will be under Sharia within a few years. As mayor of Tehran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad had the streets of the city widened for the imminent return to earth of the 12th Imam. As heir to the throne, the Prince of Wales declared the planet is doomed in 96 months unless humanity abandons the evils of capitalism and, quote, the age of convenience. He then got back in his limo and was driven to his other palace. By the way, that 96 months business, he said that 79 months ago. So the bad news is we've got less than a year and a half to go. The good news is that's probably only enough time for another 5 or 6 Australian prime ministers. A couple of months before saying that the jig would be up for us in 96 months, His Royal Highness predicted that the red squirrel would be extinct within 10 years, which would be April 2019. So if you've got your long-range diary with you, global civilization will collapse in July 2017, and then the red squirrel will get to gamble and frolic in the ruins and rubble for another 2 years before he's kaput. It's like Planet of the Squirrels. There'll be Kevin the Squirrel, and Julia the Squirrel, and Tony the Squirrel, and Malcolm the Squirrel, holding bushy-tailed spills for each other's nuts in the rubble of Canberra. You know, on balance, predicting the return of the 12th Imam seems marginally less nutty than predicting the end of the world next summer. What's the difference between Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and the Prince of Wales? One's a deranged, millenarian, apocalyptic loon, and the other's a respected former president of Iran. A joke is a small thing, but a large, profound loss. And we're living in the dawn of a new age, the end of argument. People no longer want to win the debate, they want to prevent the debate. That's true for Islam, and it's true for climate change. So the science is settled, the theology is settled, and if you disagree, you need to be, as The Guardian recommends for climate deniers, quote, silenced. And if you can't talk about something honestly, eventually you lose even the language with which to express a thought about it. The most famous Australian primary school boy on the planet is the 7-year-old boy, he must have turned 8 by now, who starred in a tweet from Syria that went viral and neatly summed up the dead end of diversity. As The Australian reported it, Quote, Khaled Sharif's son, a child raised in the suburbs of Sydney, struggles with both arms to hold up the decapitated head of a slain Syrian soldier. A 7-year-old boy, Australian born and bred, but he's proudly holding up the latest severed head in his dad's collection. Mr. Sharif was supposed to have been droned last year, but apparently he's been calling pals in Australia from Syria in recent weeks to complain about the government seizing his house in Sydney. He's off beheading people, so it's now a lucrative rental property, and he can use it for negative gearing. And with the tax savings, he can buy machetes and scimitars, and that's seriously negative gear. So you can see the pressure to reform negative gearing, because if every ISIS jihadist buys a rental property in Sydney, the entire Australian treasury will collapse. Anyway, if you think the pictures are appalling, consider the Australian establishment's reaction. Bill Shorten thinks it's a parenting issue. Quote, as a parent, I have no idea how you could ever let your child be in that situation. I think that's shocking, the opposition leader said. It's a parenting issue to Bill Shorten. He doesn't let his 7-year-old play with severed heads. He's Labour Party leader, so he's got a closet that's filled with them. He's got Kevin's and Julia's in there. But he knows you don't let your kid play with the severed head until he's at least 12 or 13, you know. It's a parenting issue. It's a parenting issue. You know, what matters in any society is who makes the noise, who makes the running. And Mr. Shorten also cautioned against attaching any particular significance to that photograph. Quote, I would be careful about using that shocking image, that shocking evil image, and trying to use it for purposes which it shouldn't be used for. It's fascinating to me, this. This is an extraordinary image of Australia to present to the world in the year 2015. A 7-year-old boy raised in the Sydney suburbs holding up this head. And the leader of the opposition's first reaction is to say, don't talk about it. Be careful what you say about it. Because the government backed off repealing Section 18C, and he's warning you that if you know what's best for you, you'll think twice before suggesting 7-year-old Australian citizens waving around severed heads might be indicative of any broader issues. What matters in any society is who makes the running. And the subtext of that pathetic, awful reaction of Bill Shorten's is to tell you that he's scared too. He's not an idiot. He's leader of the Labour Party, but he's not an idiot. And he understands deep down somewhere that what he's saying about parenting, federal mandatory parenting to tell you about the right age-appropriate head to let your child play with, he knows that's not what it's about. But his first reaction on seeing that picture is to tell Mr. and Mrs. Australia, don't say a word on the subject. If you know what's good for you, don't say a word on the subject. And he's telling you something about where society is headed. And where it's headed in the long run is Cologne on New Year's Eve, where mass sexual assault takes place in the main square in the heart of town. And for over a week, every lever of German power, federal politicians, local politicians, law enforcement, state and private media, lie to the citizenry and pretend that no such mass sexual assault ever took place. Because as with Sir Tim Hunt's joke, the reality of that mass sexual assault is at odds with state ideology. Almost every real issue facing us today is hedged in by these considerations. We drift about on the flotsam and jetsam of subjects. We never address the real subjects because we're constrained by Bill Shorten and the rest of the political class, telling us to be very careful about the bounds between which we hold these conversations. In the old days, we were a culturally confident civilization. We used the expression Western civilization, and we meant it, as Martin meant it when he spoke earlier. Mostly on the media, it occurs now as a parodic term. People, if you go on public radio in the United States and people get to call in and you've mentioned Western civilization, they always quote the famous Gandhi line when he was asked what he thought of Western civilization, and he said he thought it would be a good thing. And that was Gandhi's funniest gag. And all these public radio listeners, they use it as if they think it's the most original line in the world, because Gandhi said it. And Gandhi was very lucky, because he was up against British civil servants, which, you know, when you're playing video board games of who the really mean villains are, the kids don't say, oh, this time I want to be the British civil servants. The fact is that in the old days, we used to export progress and prosperity to the rest of the world. And these days, we are in great danger of the rest of the world exporting tribalism and impoverishment to us. And that's a free speech issue too. Ultimately, that's a free speech issue. It's interesting to me that there's a big... By the way, just with this refugee thing, I'm amazed. I've been watching this Let Them Stay, Nauru, PNG, Manus Island, Nauru, Manus Island. You know, nobody ever talks about the fact that this is a business and is a terrific business model. I don't know what it is to get to Australia, but the standard fee for getting someone from the Afghan border to Calais in France, where they have the big jungle encampment at the mouth of the Channel Tunnel. Standard fee is $10,000 US. That's to get you through to Peshawar in Pakistan, then over the border into Iran, then up into Turkey, then over to Greece, then over to Italy, into France. There's people making money all along the way. $10,000 per person, there's people getting rich on it. And I would like to see on the ABC and other Australian media, I would like to see some profiles of the people who are getting rich on it. The networks are fairly well known, they're fairly open. If you go and hang around in a bazaar in Peshawar, they'll introduce you to the people who are doing this kind of stuff. It's a business. And it's a business, as long as we're incentivizing that business, people are going to come. As long as Western leaders are talking about how it's a sign of their moral virtue to let them stay. You know, it's interesting to me, there's a big fuss at the moment about why there are no black people at the Oscars this year. I've heard all these arguments all my life and I couldn't be more bored. So if we're going to have all these too many white people in popular culture controversies, let's at least get a new wrinkle on them. You know, there are all these zombie movies these days. 4 years ago, there was a film called Cockneys versus Zombies, featuring a zombie invasion of the East End and the Cockney pushback. You know, I confess, I don't know whether zombies exist, but I know for sure that Cockneys don't. Zombies are the undead, Cockneys are dead. There's like, you know, a handful of any, what do they call them, 10-pound poms here tonight. If you're here from the East End, you're the last Cockneys on earth. Between 1971 and 2011, the white British share of London's population fell from 86% to 45%. 86%. Now, if you'd been told that the population of, say, Nigeria, it had fallen, you know, if you were told that Rwanda had fallen, the Hutus or Tutsis had fallen from 86% to 45%, you'd have thought that they'd gotten out the old machetes and done something on a scale that made what they did in the 90s look like a picnic. But in the Cockney East End, the Cockney share of the population has fallen either further. The rich and the middle class are hanging on in West London and the outer suburbs, but the Cockney working class has fallen by almost 750,000 since the beginning of this century. So just to keep the accusations of racism at bay for a couple of minutes, let's keep it all Caucasian. Actually, literally Caucasian, because there's some Chechens in this mix too. And maybe even a couple of Dagestanis too. The only young white people in the East End today are Romanians, Albanians, and other Eastern Europeans. The only Cockneys left are very old. Some of you will have seen the BBC's #1 soap opera, EastEnders, where it's still all Cockney matriarchs, and community life is centred around the pub, the Queen Vic, and it's all about how, I fancied a bit of the old slap and tickle, and how's your father, and I was thinking, sorted, mate, Bob's your uncle, let's all go down the Strand, have a banana, but the old trouble and strife fell down the apples and pears and landed on her Bristols. In the real world, in the real life East End, that life is only in the graveyards. The pubs are closed. The Duke of Kent is a mosque. The chippies are gone. In the real-life borough where EastEnders is set, white British are down to about 15%. This show is ridiculous. Instead of complaining about no black people at the Oscars, people should be claiming about excess white people on sentimental BBC creepy race television shows. Some of you may remember the sitcom Only Fools and Horses, which the ABC showed in the 80s and 90s. Steve Carell, the big Hollywood star, still wants to do a US version of that show. It's gone, it's dead. Ben Judah, in a fascinating new book on London demography, points out that in Peckham, where that book is set, the white British population is down to 10%, and they're all very old. A real-life EastEnders would be about turf wars between Muslims and Romanians. But even our pop culture is dishonest. You know, if the Cockney sparrow was an actual sparrow, he'd be on the endangered species list today. In Sydney, I was interviewed a week ago about the discrepancies in birth rates between certain suburbs. Surrey Hills has a fertility rate of about 0.78% of a baby per couple. In Lakemba, it's 4 babies per couple. So you're not going to need to have to worry about lockout laws in Sydney in 2 generations because there won't be any pubs. Good luck trying to get a drink at 3 in the afternoon, never mind 3 in the morning. This is the biggest story of our time, and it's politically incorrect to bring it up. Britain, Germany, Italy, Japan, Russia are all in steep demographic decline. Japan now sells as many adult nappies as baby nappies. A poll of British Muslims found that 27% had some sympathy for the motives behind the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Don't worry, that's only 750,000 people, without adding in the 2% who refused to answer. But let's assume, they've just got some mild kind of passive sympathy. They're like a lot of us. They're sympathetic, but they don't want to actually get off the sofa and do anything about it. If France reaches 20% Muslim population, as it will within a few years, you're going to have to get the support of 3/4 of the people who are left to have even a bare minimum support in favor of free speech in France. That's the challenge we face. It's a free speech issue that too many of us will decide to bite our tongues about this and climate change and all the other issues that face us today, because we don't want to get called racist or deniers or sexist or transphobic or tall blonde phobic or whatever the next category that's made up. These are the habits of liberty. And many people seem happy to surrender liberty as long as it's incremental and at least initially painless. And there's very little pretense that we're operating from first principles here. The same people who say that race is a social construct demand Aboriginal-only computer labs. The same people who say you can't change your sexual orientation say you can change your gender. The same people who say mocking Christianity is a sign of a healthy transgressive culture say mocking Islam is grossly culturally insensitive. It's not about a coherent worldview, it's about power. It's about naked power. It's as the French theologian Jacques Bénin Bossuet, the Bishop of Meaux, said way back in 1691, I have the right to persecute you because I am right and you are wrong. And that is why the Catholic Church in Tasmania has been brought before the Human Rights Commission for teaching. A Catholic church teaching Catholic doctrine to Catholics is brought before the Tasmanian Human Rights Commission for the same reason that the Bishop of Moe put it back in 1691. Because these days, the church is wrong and their new tormentors are right. It's not about expanding rights, it's about something much cruder. You know, the failure of Mr. Abbott's ministry on Section 18C reminds us of an important truth of Milton Friedman's. Milton used to say, don't wait to elect the right politician to do the right thing. Create the conditions whereby the wrong politicians are forced to do the right thing. And that's what happened to me when I ran afoul of Canada's human rights commissions a few years ago. My predicament was apparently discussed in Cabinet. And Cabinet all agreed that I was certain to lose because that law that John mentioned had a 100% conviction rate. 100%. Kim Jong-un was envious of it. He said, why can't our courts be like these Canadian courts? I like those odds. And we pushed back against those human rights commissions, and we gave them the worst 2 years publicity in their history. And by the end of it, it took a long time, and I'd love to have those years of my life back, but Section 13 got repealed. The political... Not thanks to the government, but thanks to a private member's bill, like Bob Day. And so there are happy endings out here. They're hard fought. Rod Kemp mentioned that at my table this evening, Lady Potter is sitting with us, whose husband was the first director of the IPA. And I'm sure, you know, everybody thinks when something like the IPA is formed that, we'll all have a bit of fun for a couple of years and then freedom will be secured and, we can all go back to watching the telly. And it's not like this. It never is like that. Freedom requires eternal vigilance and is always there to be fought for. And I learned a big lesson from my fight against Section 13. That if you push back as hard as the left pushes for its causes, your cause can be won. You can reframe the debate on your terms and you can put them on the defensive. And they are the ones who are saying, no, you can't say that. They're the ones saying, no, that's not funny. They're the ones saying, you have to be banned, you have to be silenced. They're not yet going into the offices as they did with Charlie Hebdo and gunning down everybody. But they're on the same continuum of the people who are always arguing for why you have less freedom, why you have to shut up, why you have to be quiet, and why you have to crawl into silence while they get to impose their world on you. And it doesn't have to be like that, but it starts at your level. And it starts with your friends and neighbours. And it starts at the municipal level. And it starts at the primary school level. And only ultimately does it percolate up to the national and international level. So if all of you vow not to surrender the habits of liberty, to speak freely, to act freely, to live freely, they cannot prosecute us all. And if they decide to go full Charlie Hebdo, they cannot kill us all. Every one of us is isolated until he finds that the neighbor across the street agrees with him, or the lady at the parent-teacher conference agrees with them. And we won't know, as long as they're just trying to make us all fall silent and not talk about it. When you can speak up, when you can speak freely, you are free to persuade, you are free to find allies. And that is what I learned in my Battle of Canada, and that is what I commend to Andrew and to Bob Day and to the others fighting to drive a stake through 18C. And if they do decide to ruin the lives of those students of Queensland University Technology or of the Catholic Church in Tasmania who are doing nothing other than asking for the right to make the same comments and the same observations that the gay movement and the climate change movement and all the other guys use all the time. If they are foolish enough to ruin their lives, then I'm happy to come back and do to those guys what we did to Section 13 in Canada. If you live freely, if you speak freely, if you act freely, it does not depend on a piece of paper from the government of Australia or any other government. Those are inalienable rights. Use them every day. Live with them every day. Live your life in freedom and in liberty, and no stupid act of some transient government can ever take them away from you. Thank you very much indeed.